Do you remember that bit about how that whole ACT is changing its format mid-2025? Well, guess what? The ACT finally released a practice test of its new format. They released it right before the holidays in December of 2024. Today, I am going to break the whole thing down for you section by section so you know exactly what is different and how it impacts you. In case you're new to my world, my name is Kristina. I'm the owner and founder of Ivy Lounge Test Prep. And for the last 15 years, I have helped high schoolers all around the globe, just like you, dramatically raise their SAT and ACT test scores and ultimately get into the colleges of their dreams. First off, I'm going to start with the general changes, and then I'm going to go section by section, English, math, reading, and science. You ready? Because I sure am. So let's talk general ACT format changes. Okay, I already mentioned a lot of this in a previous video. I will link to it below in case you're wondering. But just so you know, these new changes will occur if you're doing it online. It will be April this year. So April 2025 will be the new format. And if you're doing a paper and pencil version of the test, your new format will start in September of this year. So September of 2025. So I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to show you the current versus the new. Okay, so this is the current version of the ACT. So if you are an online ACT test taker, you'll still be doing this one in February of 2025. And if you are a paper and pencil test taker, then you will be doing this version through July of 2025, okay? So as you can see, the English section has 75 questions. You have 45 minutes to do it in. The math has 60 questions. You've got 60 minutes to do it in. Reading is 40 questions. You got 35 minutes to do it in. Science is required, and it is 40 questions in 35 minutes. And you'll notice all these four first sections, they all get averaged to make your composite score. And then there's this, essay that basically no one does and no college requires, but it's one essay in 40 minutes. It's optional. Okay, so this is the new ACT format that we talked about before. So you have your English section, which is 50 questions in 35 minutes. Then your math section, which is 45 questions in 50 minutes. And this is interesting because it used to be before the test was released that it was going to be in 45 minutes, but according to the ACT's website, and I can show you the screenshot, it now says 50 minutes. Okay, that's great. The reading is 36 questions in 40 minutes. And basically these three, the first three, English, math, and reading, these and only these are now averaged to make your composite score. And then now the science is 40 questions in 40 minutes. So you got a few more minutes there. And this one is no longer part of the composite score. This one is now optional, though I'd still probably take it because I'm sure a lot of colleges might still require it. We don't know yet. And then, of course, there's the essay, which basically no one does and no one requires, but it is the same. It is still optional. So this is the updated version. So those are the things that we already knew and I've already talked about. But there's another big change that was not mentioned on the website of the ACT, but when I went through the newly released practice test that I saw, and this is test-wide, and that is that every section of the new ACT, every multiple choice section, I should say, no longer has those weird FGHJ or FGHJ and K multiple choice answers. So if you recall, right, if you've ever taken an ACT practice test of the current version, you know how the odd questions will be A, B, C, D, and then the even questions will be FGHJ. And you're like, what? Why am I bubbling G instead of B? Well, they do it so in an ideal world, you do not accidentally bubble number 3 when you meant to bubble number 2. So that's why they change it up for you. But in this new version, or at least in the online version, because the online test is the one that we currently have access to, there's only A, B, C, D. They do not alternate between the other letters of the multiple choice. So if you see that it's only the ABCDs, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You didn't miss anything. You're not on the wrong question. They are no longer alternating, at least not if you're doing it online. So now let's talk about the first multiple choice section required for both new and old versions, right? And that is the English section. It always comes first. And the new version, as you just saw in the slide that I showed you, it is 50 questions in 35 minutes, okay? And off the bat, what does this mean for you? Well, this means, for starters, you've got 42 seconds a question as opposed to 36 seconds a question. So you're already getting almost 17% more time. That's pretty cool, right? But then here is other things that I saw that are not what we were told, right? Not to say that they didn't say these things could happen, but as I looked through the section and looked through the test, it's like, oh, that's a change that no one mentioned before. So you're hearing it first. The first change that we weren't expecting was that there are no longer 5 passages, right, in the English section. They actually, at least in this one released practice test, they have 6 passages. And you're like, how does that work? Because before, right, with 75 questions, 5 passages, each one had 15 questions in it. The way, at least, the new practice test is, and remember, we only have one that's released right now, so who knows, they might release future ones and it differs slightly. But based on the one that they released in late December, right? There were 6 different passages, but some of them had 10 questions associated with them, and a couple had 5 questions. Specifically, the practice section that we got to see for English, there was a 10-question passage followed by a 5-question passage, 2 more 10-question passages, another 5-question passage, and it ended with a 10-question passage. Who knows, maybe in future, I don't know if they're going to always do that, if it's going to be 4 passages that have 10 questions and 2 that have 5, or if they might alter that, or what order they'll do them in, but I noticed it for this one. So keep in mind, your passages seem to have fewer questions in them, and they vary in length. So that is a big change that we didn't know until they released the practice test. So what does that mean for you timing-wise, right? Well, if you have a 10-question passage, you should be aiming to complete that in 7 minutes if you're, a regular time test taker. If you have a passage with only 5 questions in it, you should be doing that in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, so 3.5 minutes if you are a regular time test taker, okay? But now there's another change, and I was not expecting this one, and it will blow your mind with the English section because it actually alters the game. Okay. Do you recall how on the current/old version of the ACT, most of the questions, they don't actually ask you a question. It's just like 13, and then there's 4 answer choices. And you know that when you go to the passage, there is something underlined that says 13. And all you're doing is taking these 4 answer choices and plugging them in and seeing which one fits, right? But they're not actually like asking you a question. Most of them have been like that. There have always been a few questions that they ask, like if the writer were to delete the underlined portion, the essay would primarily lose, or the writer is considering adding the following sentence, should he or shouldn't he? Like there are always a few that are going to ask you questions, but the vast majority of them, easily over half, if not maybe 2/3, they don't actually have a question. You just know you're supposed to be picking the correct answer choice that edits the passage appropriately. Well, not so anymore. On the new version of the ACT, every single English question has a question stem. And you're like, what is a question stem? It's like the basic question that they're asking you before the 4 multiple choice answers, right? This is why it is groundbreaking, because what they have done by asking you certain question stems, they are in essence telling you which grammar topic or which English topic you should be doing right now. So these are some examples of actual question stems from the practice test. And I'll show you how like they're literally telling you what part of grammar you need to be doing. Okay. Here's a very common one. It's which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So this is your kind of catch-all grammar question. Any punctuation would fall under this question, like subject verb agreement, adjective, adverbs, things like that. They're going to be asking you this question. Okay. But then there are a couple, and I really was like, I don't believe this when I saw it, right? One of them literally said, which one provides the best transition from the last paragraph to this paragraph? And then many other questions asked, which transition word or phrase is most logical in context? And then I even saw one that says, which transition word or phrase, if any, is most logical in context? Folks, do you know what that means? They're literally telling you this is a transition word question. They're labeling it for you. So you don't have to be distracted by like, oh, does the subject agree with the verb? Like, you know, it's a transition word question. So you can just go ahead and answer it like you know you're supposed to answer a transition word question. That to me is wild. Okay. Here are a few others that also give away what it's asking. Let's see. Okay, here's another. Which choice most effectively maintains the essay's tone? They're literally telling you it's not a grammar thing. It's like a word choice thing. You're supposed to keep the correct tone of the essay. Amazing. So you're not distracting yourself nitpicking about an adjective or an adverb or a comma. You're picking the correct word. Okay, awesome. This is another one that denotes like word choice. Which choice is clearest and most precise in context? They're literally asking you a word choice question, and it's about being concise, so not redundant, but also the word that fits in context. This is amazing. It's not really grammar. It's more about the meaning. They told you, they gave it away. And then finally, and this is like the biggest tell out of all of them, so I saved it for last. Which choice is least redundant in context? Like, do you understand that the ACT has always asked redundancy questions? But the deal is, most students, before I start working with them, they're getting it wrong because they don't realize that this was an option, that something being redundant or too long or clunky is a reason it can be wrong. Like they didn't realize that was on the menu of things the ACT could ask, right? And also, even when they do know it, sometimes a student might still struggle because they're trying to see if the punctuation's right, see if the verb tense is right, and they don't realize that that wasn't what the question's asking. It's asking you to not be redundant. So if they're asking you literally which choice is least redundant in context, they're telling you what to do. They're telling you it's a redundancy question. So you don't have to kind of go through your mental list of all the maybe it's this, maybe it's that. It saves so much time, and chances are you're probably going to get it right because you know what they're asking you to do. So those, my friends, are the changes in the English section, which I think are a big deal because it changes how you go about the section, right? So now let's talk about the math section and how it is going to be different, okay? So the current or the old, depending on what time you're looking at this, ACT had 60 questions in 60 minutes. So, 1 minute per question. Now the new ACT math section only has 45 questions, right? So 15 fewer questions. We thought it was supposed to be in 45 minutes. That's what everyone was saying, and that's what we all thought back in the fall. But according to the website, and I will share my screen in a second to show you, it appears we actually get 50 minutes for this, okay? And that's cool because instead of keeping up the same one question per minute pace, just doing fewer of them, now we actually get like 1:06, almost 1:07 per question. So we in fact do get some more time per question, okay? Now, the math topics and the categories and the distribution thereof, those are all basically the same. Like it's still talking about the same math concepts. You still need to learn the same amount of formulas. You still have to do the same amount of work to prepare. It's just going to evaluate you in fewer questions. You can still use a calculator. Calculators are still okay. There's no reference sheet, so that hasn't changed. There wasn't before, there still is not. But now here is a big difference, okay? And I wasn't expecting this. And that is, you know how before in the ACT's math section, there were actually 5 multiple choice selections you could make. So it was A, B, C, D, E, or the even questions would be F, G, H, J, and K, right? So now we don't have 5 choices. There's only 4 choices. So it's A, B, C, D, and at least for the online one, it's going to be A, B, C, D for all of them. So that's cool because that means that if you're guessing, right, you've got like a 1 in 4 shot, which is 25% chance of getting it right, versus a 1 in 5 shot, which is only a 20% chance of getting it right. It also means that if you're using your answers, right, to back solve and you're using the answer choices to try and figure out the answer, you have fewer to try. So it should save you time in addition to you getting more time. So here we go. This is the page. I am linking to it in the notes, but basically you can see that math, it does in fact say it's 50 minutes for standard time, right? The other ones are the same, like those did not change, but sure, if this is what they're saying, this is what I am going to go with. So that, my friends, are all of the math section updates. So again, if you're just tuning in, my name is Kristina of Ivy Lunch Test Prep, and I help high schoolers all over the globe drastically raise their SAT and ACT test scores and write compelling college application essays to ultimately land a place in their dream schools. Now I want to ask you a question, and that is, are you surprised so far by any of these changes? Was there anything you weren't expecting? If so, write it in the comments below because I want to hear. And while you're at it, just go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. And then that way, every week when I post, you will be the first to see the latest in SAT, ACT, and college application essay updates. So now let's talk about the reading section, okay? So as you know, the broad strokes is that the new section is 36 questions in 40 minutes. Right? If you're a regular time test taker. All of this is if you're a regular time test taker, okay? Now, this is versus the old, or you could call it current, depending on when you're watching this section, which would be 35 minutes to do 40 questions. So what just happened? We lowered the number of questions by 4, and we raised the number of minutes by 5, right? So this is what it actually means and how the reading section is structured now. We have 4 passages. We always did, but we still have 4 passages, but now each of them have 9 questions, okay? So it used to be 4 passages and they each had 10 questions. Now it's 4 passages and each one has 9 questions. Now our breakdown, if you're thinking about timing and the pacing of it, is that you do 1 passage now in 10 minutes. So this is actually way better than it was before, right? So you have 1 passage in 10 minutes to answer only 9 questions versus what it used to be is 1 passage in 8 minutes, 45 seconds, but you had 10 questions to do that in. So you actually should feel a lot more comfortable as far as the time goes, okay? Now, some things aren't changing, okay? So the passage types and the number of them is not changing. So we have 1 fiction followed by 3 nonfictions. That's the same. One of those, and we don't know which, is a double passage. That is also the same. In addition, the order of the passage types remains the same. So it's still fiction, followed by social science, then humanities, then natural science. That order is staying the same. But now here is a difference. So on the online test, and I doubt it would be on the paper and pencil test because logistically, I just don't understand how it would work. But at least if you're doing the test online, when a question mentions a word, maybe it's a word in context, or a phrase, or even a line number reference, or it says like, oh, the 5th paragraph. When a question mentions something in particular like that, it will actually highlight that word, phrase, or lines or paragraph in the text for you. So you don't actually have to annotate anything, okay? So that is a nice little change that might affect how you go through a passage. So this is why I'm telling it to you. So again, this would be if you're taking it online. So now let's talk about the science section. And this is the last of the sections we are going to cover in today's video. So the new science section is going to be 40 questions in 40 minutes. Now this is compared to the previous one, which was 40 questions, the same number of questions, but in 35 minutes, okay? So I want to talk here because they did something with the science section that I thought was like, oh, wow, that's going to affect some people. Okay, so I want to tell you what it is. The number of passages and the number of questions per passage, and even the distribution of the different types of passages, those are all different. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean. For the past 10 years, basically, so since 2015, there have been 6 passages in a science section. And it's been this way for literally a decade. So 3 of them were experiment passages. They had 7 questions apiece. 2 of them were chart and graphs. They had 6 questions apiece, and 1 was a fighting scientist, and it had 7 questions, total of 40 questions. So what's so different is that now we don't have 6 passages anymore. At least on the practice test that the ACT released to us, there are 7 passages, okay? And each one has 1 fewer question. So this is actually how it works. So now, right, we still have 2 chart and graph passages, but they each have 1 fewer question. So instead of 6 questions apiece, it's 5 questions apiece, right? So that means that you're only doing 10 of your questions based on chart and graph passages, right? Versus 12, right? Which is the current version of the ACT. There's still 1 fighting scientist passage, but instead of it being 7 questions, it's now 6. So again, 1 fewer question on this type of passage. But here's the thing. There are no longer 3 experiment passages. At least on the one released practice test we've seen, there are 4 experiments passages. And instead of 7 questions apiece, they have 6 questions apiece, right? So if you think about it, 4 passages times 6 questions, that's 24 of your 40 questions. 60% of the section, those are experiment passages, right? So we have a bigger emphasis on the experiment passages and a less of an emphasis on the chart and graph passages and on the fighting scientist passage. Also, what this means is as far as timing of the passages, right? Before, when we were doing 6 passages in 35 minutes, we had basically 5 minutes, 50 seconds per passage, right? Now, it's going to seem that this isn't improving, but I promise you it is. Now, right, we have 40 questions, but we have 40 minutes to do it in, right? So we raise the number of minutes, but then there's 7 passages. So we actually get 5 minutes, 42 and change seconds, like 5 minutes, almost 43 seconds per passage. And you might be thinking, wait, that's like 7 seconds less than I had before. But remember, the difference is you have 1 fewer question to answer. So it's roughly the same amount of time per passage. It's just you have 1 less question to answer, okay? But you do have to task switch 1 more time because we have 7 different passages instead of 6. So that, my friends, is going to be all the updates to the ACT that you can expect to see in each of the sections for the newly released test. Again, you would start to see this in April of 2025 if you're taking it online, and September of 2025 if you're doing the paper and pencil version. So again, if you need more help as far as the ACT and all the changes that are afoot, I am going to drop a link below to my original video about all the updates with the new test, right? And if you just need help with this whole test prep process, this whole like, how do you get into college and what are all the moving parts? I actually have an amazing free workshop for you. It is called your Fail-Proof College Prep Plan. So register in the link below.